The secret I had carried for years finally consumed me. When the truth came out, everything around me fell apart. The corruption I had ignored now threatened to destroy everything. But in the end, it was forgiveness that allowed us to start over. I always thought I had it all figured out. My name is Victor Montero, and for years I believed I was living the American dream. A successful business tycoon with a loving family and a reputation that preceded me wherever I went in San Francisco. Little did I know that the foundations of my perfect life were built on a lie so profound it would shake everything I held dear to its very core. It was a Tuesday morning like any other when my world began to unravel. The California sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office on the top floor of Montero Industries headquarters. I remember adjusting my tie, a habit I'd developed over years of power meetings and high-stakes negotiations. But this day was different. This day, fate had decided to deal me a hand I never saw coming. My secretary buzzed in, her voice tinged with an unusual hesitation. "Mr. Montero, there's a Ms. Carmen Rodriguez here to see you. She says it's urgent." Carmen Rodriguez. A name from the past that I hadn't heard in years. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment I considered turning her away. But curiosity got the better of me. "Send her in," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The door opened, and there she stood. Older, yes, but still with that fire in her eyes that had captivated me all those years ago. Carmen walked in, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step echoing like a countdown to an explosion I didn't yet know was coming. "Victor," she said, her voice a mix of familiarity and something else, regret perhaps. "It's been a long time." I nodded, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Indeed it has, Carmen. What brings you here after all these years?" She sat down, her posture rigid, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I have something to tell you, Victor. Something I should have told you a long time ago." And just like that, with those words, the comfortable lie I'd been living began to crumble. Carmen took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made me brace myself. "Do you remember Valeria?" The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Valeria. Of course I remembered her. She was a family friend, the daughter of one of Carmen's closest confidants, a bright young woman who had been a constant presence in our lives for years. My son, Alejandro, had grown up with her, treating her like a sister. "What about Valeria?" I asked, a creeping sense of dread crawling up my spine. Carmen's next words shattered my world. "She's your daughter, Victor. Your biological daughter." The room seemed to spin. I gripped the edge of my desk, my knuckles turning white. That's impossible," I stammered. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were a lie. Carmen's eyes welled up with tears. "I'm so sorry, Victor. I should have told you years ago. But I was young, scared, and by the time I realized the magnitude of what I'd done, it seemed too late to change anything." My mind raced back to that summer, over 2 decades ago. Carmen and I had a brief but intense affair before I met my wife, Isabel. We had gone our separate ways, and I had put it behind me, focusing on building my life with Isabel and our son, Alejandro. Does Valeria know?" I managed to ask, my throat dry. Carmen shook her head. "No, she doesn't. But Victor, she needs to know. She deserves to know the truth." I stood up abruptly, walking to the window. The San Francisco skyline stretched out before me, a view I'd always found comforting. Now it seemed like a vast, uncaring witness to my unraveling life. "Why now, Carmen? Why after all these years?" She was silent for a moment before responding. "I'm sick, Victor. The doctor... They don't give me much time. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving this world with this secret still buried." I turned to face her, seeing for the first time the lines of worry etched deep into her face, the pallor beneath her makeup. My anger deflated, replaced by a confusing mix of emotions, sorrow, fear, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. "What do you expect me to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Carmen stood up, smoothing her skirt. "I don't expect anything, Victor, but I hope you'll do the right thing. For Valeria's sake." As she turned to leave, I called out, "Carmen, wait." She paused at the door, looking back at me. "I'm sorry about your health. If there's anything I can do..." She gave me a sad smile. "Just be there for her, Victor. That's all I ask." And with that she was gone, leaving me alone with a truth that threatened to destroy everything I held dear. The rest of that day passed in a blur. I cancelled my meetings. Much to the surprise of my staff, I couldn't focus, couldn't think straight. My mind kept replaying Carmen's words over and over again. Valeria, the young woman I'd known for years, was my daughter, my flesh and blood. As evening fell, I found myself driving home in a daze. The lights of the Golden Gate Bridge blurred as I crossed. My thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. How could I tell Isabel? How would Alejandro react? And Valeria? How could I look her in the eye knowing what I now knew? I pulled into the driveway of our Presidio Heights home, a place that had always been my sanctuary. Now it felt like I was about to bring a storm into this haven of peace. Isabel met me at the door, her smile fading as she saw my expression. "Victor, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." In a way, I had. The ghost of a past I thought long buried. "We need to talk," I said, my voice hoarse. "There's something I have to tell you." As we sat in our living room, the weight of my secret pressing down on me, I realized that the comfortable lie I'd been living was about to give way to an uncomfortable truth, and nothing would ever be the same again. I took a deep breath, looking into the eyes of the woman I loved, the mother of my son. "Isabel," I began, my voice shaking, "there's something about my past, about our family, and that you need to know." And as I started to speak, I knew that this was just the beginning. The story of my family, of Valeria, of the secrets we'd all kept, was about to unfold in ways I could never have imagined. The perfect life I thought I had was unraveling, thread by thread, and I was powerless to stop it. The days that followed my conversation with Carmen were a blur of sleepless nights and tension-filled mornings. I had told Isabel everything, watching as disbelief, then hurt, and finally a quiet anger settled into her eyes. She didn't yell or scream. Her silence was far more devastating. It was as if the foundation of our marriage, built on trust and honesty, had crumbled beneath our feet. Alejandro, our son, or should I say, my son with Isabel, was a different story entirely. At 25, he was no longer the little boy who looked at me with unquestioning adoration. When we sat him down to explain the situation, his reaction was explosive. "How could you do this to us?" he shouted, pacing our living room like a caged animal. "To Mom? To me? And Valeria? God, Valeria! Do you have any idea what this will do to her?" I didn't have an answer. How could I? The truth was, I had no idea how to navigate this minefield I had unwittingly created over 2 decades ago. "Alejandro, please," Isabel said, her voice strained. "Your father made a mistake, but—" "A mistake?" Alejandro cut her off, his eyes blazing. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store. This is a betrayal." His words cut deep, but I knew I deserved them. I had to face the consequences of my actions, no matter how unintentional they might have been. "Son," I began, but he held up a hand, silencing me. "Don't," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Just don't." With that, he stormed out of the house, leaving Isabel and me in a silence that spoke volumes. The next few days were a delicate dance of avoidance and stilted conversations. Isabel threw herself into her charity work, spending long hours at various fundraisers and committee meetings. I buried myself in work, using the demands of running Montero Industries as a shield against the chaos of my personal life. But the elephant in the room remained. We still hadn't told Valeria. It was a week after Carmen's visit that I finally gathered the courage to reach out to Valeria. I invited her to my office, my heart pounding as I waited for her arrival. When she walked in, I was struck by how much she resembled Carmen. The same dark, expressive eyes, the same graceful movements. How had I never noticed before? "Mr. Montero," she greeted me with a smile. "It's good to see you. Is everything all right? Your message seemed urgent." I gestured for her to sit, trying to keep my composure. "Valeria, there's something I need to tell you. Something that will change things between us." Her brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't understand. What's going on?" Taking a deep breath, I began to explain. I told her about my relationship with Carmen all those years ago, about the recent revelation, about the fact that I was her biological father. As I spoke, I watched the emotions play across her face. Shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, a deep, profound sadness. When I finished, Valeria sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. Then, without a word, she stood up and walked out of my office. I didn't try to stop her. What right did I have? The fallout was immediate and far-reaching. Valeria cut off all contact with our family. Alejandro, despite his own anger towards me, tried to reach out to her, but she rebuffed his attempts. It was as if she wanted to erase us entirely from her life. Weeks passed, and the strain began to show in every aspect of my life. At work, I found myself distracted, making mistakes I never would have made before. My employees noticed, whispering behind my back about what could have caused the unflappable Victor Montero to lose his edge. At home, things were even worse. Isabel and I moved around each other like ghosts, the warmth and intimacy of our relationship replaced by a cold, formal politeness. Alejandro rarely came home, and when he did, his interactions with me were terse and laden with unspoken resentment. It was during this time that I began to notice changes in our family dynamics that I had been too blind to see before. Alejandro, always so confident and sure of himself, began to exhibit signs of insecurity. He questioned his place in the family, in the company, in the world. I realized with a pang of guilt that my revelation had shaken not just his trust in me, but his very sense of identity. Isabel, too, was different. The vibrant, passionate woman I had fallen in love with seemed to have retreated into herself. She spent more and more time at her studio, painting dark, turbulent canvases that reflected the turmoil in our lives. As for me, I found myself standing at crossroads I never thought I'd face. The carefully constructed world I had built was crumbling, and I was at a loss as to how to rebuild it, or if I even should. It was on a particularly gloomy San Francisco evening, as I sat alone in my study nursing a glass of scotch, that I received a call that would set in motion a chain of events I could never have anticipated. "Mr. Montero," a hesitant voice came through the line. "This is Dr. Ramirez from San Francisco General Hospital. I'm calling about Carmen Rodriguez." My grip tightened on the phone. "What about her?" "She's been admitted to our ICU. Her condition is, well, it's not good. She's asking for you." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. "I'll be there as soon as I can." As I hung up the phone, I realized that this was more than just about Carmen. This was about Valeria, about the truth, about facing the consequences of the past. And as I grabbed my coat and car keys, I knew that whatever happened next would change the course of all our lives forever. The drive to the hospital was a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. As I navigated the familiar streets of San Francisco, I couldn't help but reflect on how quickly life can change. One moment you think you have it all figured out, and the next you're rushing to the bedside of a woman you once loved, carrying the weight of decades of secrets. I arrived at San Francisco General, the imposing structure looming before me like a harbinger of what was to come. As I made my way through the sterile corridors, the smell of disinfectant and the beeping of machines created a surreal backdrop to the turmoil in my mind. Room 507. I hesitated at the door, my hand hovering over the handle. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. Carmen lay in the hospital bed, a shadow of her former self. Tubes and wires surrounded her, the steady beep of the heart monitor a grim reminder of her fragility. Her eyes, once so full of life, were sunken and tired, but they lit up with recognition as I entered. "Victor," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You came." I moved to her bedside, taking her hand in mine. It felt so small, so fragile. "Of course I came, Carmen." She managed a weak smile. "I wasn't sure you would, after everything." "That doesn't matter now," I said, surprising myself with the gentleness in my voice. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm running out of time," she replied, a hint of her old directness shining through. "Victor, I need to know, did you tell her? Does Valeria know?" I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "Yes," I told her. She didn't take it well." Carmen closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'm so sorry, Victor. I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I was protecting her, protecting all of us. But I was wrong, so wrong." As I sat there, holding the hand of a woman I had once loved, I realized that the story of our family was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. And as the night deepened outside the hospital windows, I knew that the path forward would be fraught with challenges, revelations, and perhaps, if we were lucky, redemption. Little did I know that this was just the tip of the iceberg. The secrets that lay buried in the past were about to resurface, threatening not just our family but everything we had ever known. And as I sat there in that quiet hospital room, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the precipice of something much bigger than ourselves. The stage was set, the players were in motion, and the drama that would unfold in the coming days would test the very limits of love, loyalty, and what it truly means to be a family. The steady beep of Carmen's heart monitor had become a haunting melody, punctuating the heavy silence that hung between us. As I sat by her bedside, the weight of our shared past pressing down on my shoulders, I couldn't help but feel that we were on the brink of something monumental. "Victor," Carmen's voice was barely above a whisper, "there's more you need to know." I leaned in closer, my heart racing. "What is it, Carmen?" She took a labored breath, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that belied her weakened state. "The Montero Foundation. It's not what you think it is." The Montero Foundation had been my pride and joy for years, a philanthropic organization I had established to give back to the community. It was my way of balancing the scales, of doing some good in a world that had given me so much. To hear Carmen speak of it with such ominous undertones sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked, my throat suddenly dry. But before Carmen could elaborate, a nurse entered the room, checking her vitals and adjusting her medication. By the time we were alone again, Carmen had drifted into a fitful sleep, leaving me with more questions than answers. As I left the hospital, my mind was a whirlwind of confusion and dread. What could Carmen have meant about the foundation? And how was it connected to the web of secrets that seemed to be unraveling around me? The drive home was a blur, San Francisco's foggy streets mirroring the haze in my mind. When I arrived, I found Isabel waiting up for me, her face a mask of concern and something else, suspicion. "How is she?" Isabel asked, her voice carefully neutral. I sank into the armchair across from her, suddenly feeling every one of my years. "Not good. The doctors, they don't think she has much time left." Isabel nodded, her eyes never leaving my face. "And Valeria, does she know?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with unspoken accusations and fears. I haven't told her yet," I admitted. "I don't even know if she'd want to hear from me." "You have to tell her, Victor," Isabel said, her voice firm. "Whatever has happened between us, Valeria deserves to know about her mother's condition." I knew she was right, but the thought of reaching out to Valeria again filled me with dread. How could I face her after everything that had happened? The next morning, I found myself standing outside Valeria's apartment building, my finger hovering over the buzzer. After what felt like an eternity, I pressed it, holding my breath as I waited for a response. "Who is it?" Valeria's voice crackled through the intercom, guarded and distant. It's Victor," I said, hating how uncertain I sounded. "Please, Valeria, I need to talk to you." "It's about Carmen." There was a long pause, and for a moment I thought she might refuse to see me. Then the door buzzed open. Valeria's apartment was a reflection of her personality, artistic, vibrant, and fiercely independent. As I entered, I saw her standing by the window, her posture rigid and defensive. "What about my mother?" she asked, cutting straight to the chase. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for her reaction. "She's in the hospital, Valeria. It's not looking good." I watched as the news hit her, saw the flash of pain in her eyes before she masked it with anger. "And you're telling me this now? How long have you known?" "I just found out last night," I said, holding up my hands in a placating gesture. "I came as soon as I could." Valeria turned away, her shoulders shaking slightly. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "I'll go see her, but not with you. I can't deal with all of this right now." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I understand, but Valeria, there's something else. Something Carmen said about the Montero Foundation." "I don't want to hear it," she cut me off, turning back to face me with fire in her eyes. "Whatever secrets or lies you're mixed up in, I want no part of it. Just go, please." As I left Valeria's apartment, I felt a mix of relief and frustration. At least she knew about Carmen now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial, that there were still pieces of this puzzle I couldn't see. Back at Montero Industries, I threw myself into work, trying to lose myself in spreadsheets and business reports. But Carmen's words about the foundation kept nagging at me. I found myself poring over financial records, searching for what? I didn't even know. It was late in the evening when I stumbled upon something odd, a series of large transfers to an offshore account, hidden beneath layers of seemingly legitimate transactions. My blood ran cold as I realized the implications. Someone had been siphoning money from the foundation, and they had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. As I dug deeper, a name kept popping up: Alejandro Montero, my son's name, associated with these suspicious transactions. It couldn't be. Not Alejandro. He wouldn't. A knock at my office door startled me out of my thoughts. I quickly minimized the screens on my computer as my assistant poked her head in. "Mr. Montero, there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent." I frowned, checking my watch. It was well past normal business hours. "Who is it?" "She says her name is Elena Fuentes. She claims to have information about the Montero Foundation." My heart skipped a beat. Elena Fuentes. I knew that name. She was one of the foundation's project managers, someone I had always considered reliable and trustworthy. "Send her in," I said, my mouth suddenly dry. Elena entered, her face pale and drawn. She glanced nervously over her shoulder before closing the door behind her. "Mr. Montero," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I'm sorry to come to you like this, but I didn't know who else to turn to. I've discovered something about the foundation, something terrible, and I'm afraid your son might be involved." As Elena began to speak, laying out a tale of corruption and deceit that went far beyond anything I had imagined, I felt my world tilting on its axis once again. The comfortable lie I had been living was crumbling around me, revealing a truth far more complex and dangerous than I could have ever anticipated. And somewhere in the back of my mind I couldn't help but wonder, how much more could our family take before it broke apart completely? Little did I know, the revelations that were about to unfold would test not just our family bonds, but the very fabric of everything I had built my life upon. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change all of our lives forever, and there was no turning back now. Elena's words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, poisoning everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, and the legacy I had worked so hard to build. As she laid out the details of the corruption within the Montero Foundation, I felt my world crumbling around me. "Mr. Montero," Elena continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've uncovered evidence of money laundering, kickbacks, and fraudulent contracts. The Foundation's charitable work is being used as a front for something much darker." I leaned back in my chair, my mind reeling. "And you're saying Alejandro is involved in this?" Elena nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "His name is all over the documents I've found. But Mr. Montero, I don't think he's the mastermind. I believe someone is using him, manipulating him somehow. The thought of my son being manipulated, being drawn into something so dangerous and illegal, filled me with a potent mixture of anger and fear. "Who?" I demanded. "Who could be behind this?" Eleanor shook her head. "I don't know for certain, but I have my suspicions. There's a name that keeps coming up in connection with these transactions: Marcus Blackwood." The name hit me like a physical blow. Marcus Blackwood was a business rival, someone I had crossed paths with numerous times over the years. He was known for his ruthless tactics and questionable ethics, but I never imagined he would stoop to something like this. "I need to see these documents," I said, my voice hardening with resolve. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. "Everything I've found is on here. But Mr. Montero, be careful. I don't think I'm the only one who knows about this. I've been feeling watched." As Elena left my office, I felt the weight of responsibility settling heavily on my shoulders. I had to get to the bottom of this, not just for the sake of the foundation, but for Alejandro. I couldn't believe my son would willingly participate in something so corrupt. There had to be more to the story. I spent the next several hours poring over the documents Elena had provided. The more I read, the more my heart sank. The evidence was damning, pointing to a vast network of corruption that had infiltrated every level of the foundation. And at the center of it all, my son's name appeared again and again. It was well past midnight when I finally left the office, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. As I drove home through the deserted streets of San Francisco, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Paranoia, I told myself, but the sensation persisted. I arrived home to find the house dark and silent. Isabel had left a note on the kitchen counter. "Gone to stay with my sister for a few days, need some time to think." Isabel. The emptiness of the house seemed to mock me, a stark reminder of how quickly everything had fallen apart. I poured myself a drink, hoping the alcohol would dull the ache in my chest, but it did little to ease the turmoil in my mind. As I sat in the darkened living room nursing my drink and my thoughts, a soft knock at the door startled me. My heart racing, I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. To my surprise, it was Valeria. I opened the door, taking in her tear-stained face and disheveled appearance. "Valeria, what's wrong?" She pushed past me into the house, her body trembling. "I just came from the hospital. Mom, Carmen, she's gone." The news hit me like a physical blow. Carmen gone. Despite everything that had happened between us, the complications and the pain, I felt a profound sense of loss. "I'm so sorry, Valeria," I said, reaching out to comfort her, but she flinched away from my touch. "Don't," she said, her voice hard. "I didn't come here for comfort. I came because she told me something before she died. Something about you, about the foundation, about Alejandro." I felt my blood run cold. "What did she say?" Valeria's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of anger and confusion. "She said that the foundation is in danger, that Alejandro is in over his head, and that you're the only one who can make it right." "What does that mean, Victor? What have you and Alejandro gotten mixed up in?" I sank onto the couch, suddenly feeling every one of my years. "It's complicated, Valeria. I'm still trying to figure it out myself, but I promise you, I'm going to get to the bottom of this." She scoffed, pacing the room like a caged animal. More secrets, more lies. "Is anything about this family real?" Her words stung, but I couldn't deny the truth in them. "Valeria, please. I know I've made mistakes, but I want to make things right. Help me understand what's going on. What else did Carmen tell you?" Valeria hesitated, conflict clear on her face. Finally she spoke, her voice low and urgent. She mentioned a name, Marcus Blackwood. She said he's the key to all of this, but that he's dangerous. She was scared, Victor. I've never seen her like that before. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture they formed was more frightening than I could have imagined. Marcus Blackwood, the foundation, Alejandro. It was all connected somehow, a web of deceit that threatened to ensnare us all. "We need to find Alejandro," I said, standing up. "If he's in danger, we have to warn him." Valeria nodded, a flicker of the old familial bond showing through her anger. "I'll try calling him." As Valeria dialed Alejandro's number, I moved to the window, peering out into the night. The street outside was quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Suddenly, Valeria gasped. "Victor, Alejandro's voicemails. It's not his voice, it's someone else, someone I don't recognize." A chill ran down my spine as I turned to face her. "What does it say?" Her face had gone pale, her hand shaking as she held the phone. It says, "The sins of the father shall be visited upon the son." "Time is running out, Victor Montero." In that moment I realized that the comfortable lie I had been living was well and truly shattered. The truth that was emerging was far more dangerous and complex than I could have ever imagined. My son was missing, possibly in danger. My daughter was caught in the crossfire of a decades-old deception. And at the center of it all was a mystery that threatened to destroy everything I held dear. As Valeria and I stared at each other, the weight of our shared predicament settling over us, I knew that the time for secrets and lies was over. If we were going to survive this, if we were going to save Alejandro and unravel the truth behind the Foundation's corruption, we would need to work together. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. Little did I know the revelations that awaited us would shake the very foundations of our family and our lives. The journey ahead would test our bonds, our beliefs, and our very understanding of right and wrong. And somewhere out there in the shadows of San Francisco, Marcus Blackwood was waiting, holding all the cards in a game I didn't even know I was playing. The dawn broke over San Francisco, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. But for Valeria and me, it felt as though we were trapped in an endless night. We had spent the hours since Alejandro's chilling voicemail message trying to piece together the puzzle that our lives had become. "We need to go to the police," Valeria said, pacing the living room for what felt like the 100th time. I shook my head, my mind racing through the potential consequences. "We can't, not yet. If what we suspect about the Foundation is true, going to the authorities could put Alejandro in even more danger." Valeria's eyes flashed with anger. So what? We just sit here and do nothing while your son, my brother, is out there somewhere, possibly in danger. The word brother caught me off guard. It was the first time Valeria had acknowledged her relationship to Alejandro since learning the truth about her parentage. Despite the gravity of our situation, I felt a small flicker of hope. No, we're not going to do nothing, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We're going to find him ourselves. But first we need more information. I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Michael Chen. Michael was an old friend, a former FBI agent turned private investigator. If anyone could help us navigate this treacherous terrain, it was him. As I explained our situation to Michael over the phone, carefully omitting certain details about the Foundation's potential illegal activities, I could feel Valeria's eyes boring into me. She knew I wasn't telling the whole truth, but she remained silent. "I'll be there in an hour," Michael said, his voice grim. "Don't do anything until I arrive." The wait for Michael's arrival was excruciating. Valeria and I moved around each other in an uneasy dance, both wanting to reach out to bridge the gap between us, but neither knowing how. Finally, the doorbell rang. Michael Chen stood on the doorstep, his weathered face a mask of professional concern. "Victor," he nodded, then turned to Valeria. "And you must be Valeria. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." As we settled in the living room, Michael's keen eyes took in every detail. "Start from the beginning," he said. "And this time, Victor, I need the whole truth." Taking a deep breath, I began to recount everything. The revelation about Valeria's parentage, Carmen's cryptic warnings about the Foundation, Elena's evidence of corruption, and finally, Alejandro's disappearance and the threatening voicemail. Michael listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each passing minute. When I finished, he let out a long, low whistle. "You've stepped into a hornet's nest, Victor. This goes way beyond a simple missing persons case." "Can you help us find Alejandro?" Valeria asked, her voice tinged with desperation. Michael nodded slowly. "I can try, but you both need to understand, if what you're saying about the Foundation is true, we're dealing with some very dangerous people. This Marcus Blackwood character in particular has a reputation that would make the devil himself nervous." "What do you know about him?" I asked, leaning forward. "Officially, he's a successful businessman with interests in real estate and technology. Unofficially, there are rumors of connections to organized crime, political corruption, you name it. If he's involved with your Foundation, Victor, you're in deep trouble." The gravity of our situation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. I glanced at Valeria, seeing my own fear and determination mirrored in her eyes. "What's our next move?" I asked. Michael pulled out a small notebook. "First, we need to trace Alejandro's last known movements." "Valeria, when was the last time you spoke to him?" As Valeria recounted her last conversation with Alejandro, I couldn't help but marvel at the strange turn of events. Here we were, the daughter I had only recently acknowledged, and I, working together to save the son I had raised. The irony wasn't lost on me. "There's something else," I said, once Valeria had finished. "The flash drive Elena gave me. It contains detailed records of the Foundation's transactions. If we can decrypt it, we might find a clue to Alejandro's whereabouts." Michael's eyes lit up. "That could be the key. Do you have it with you?" I nodded, retrieving the drive from my pocket. As I handed it to Michael, our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of understanding pass between us. We both knew that whatever was on this drive could change everything. "I have a contact," Michael said, pocketing the drive. "A computer expert who might be able to crack this. I'll take it to her right away." As Michael prepared to leave, Valeria suddenly spoke up. "Wait, there's one more thing." She turned to me, her expression a mix of uncertainty and resolve. "Victor, I think it's time we visited the Montero Foundation offices. If there are any clues to Alejandro's disappearance, they might be there." I hesitated, weighing the risks. Going to the Foundation offices could alert whoever was behind this that we were onto them. But Valeria was right. We needed answers, and we needed them fast. "Okay," I agreed. "But we go together and we need to be careful. Michael, can you give us some backup?" Michael nodded. "I'll have a team in place. Just give me the word when you're ready to move." As Michael left, Valeria and I found ourselves alone once again. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken words and shared fears. "Valeria," I began, struggling to find the right words. "I know this isn't how either of us imagined things would turn out, but I want you to know I'm glad you're here. We're going to find Alejandro together." She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I'm not doing this for you, Victor. I'm doing it for Alejandro and for my mother. But I'm glad I'm not facing this alone." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. As we began to plan our next move, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever secrets were yet to be uncovered, we would face them as a family, broken and bruised, but not defeated. Little did we know, our visit to the Montero Foundation offices would set in motion a chain of events that would test our newfound alliance to its very limits. The truth we were about to uncover would shake the very foundations of everything we thought we knew, and the danger we would face would be greater than anything we could have imagined. As the sun climbed higher in the San Francisco sky, casting long shadows across the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into the lion's den. But with Valeria by my side and Michael watching our backs, I was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The game was afoot, and the stakes had never been higher. The Montero Foundation headquarters loomed before us, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to touch the sky. Once I had looked upon this building with pride, seeing it as a symbol of all the good we were doing in the world. Now, it felt like a monument to secrets and lies. Valeria and I stood on the sidewalk, both of us hesitating before the entrance. In the reflection of the glass doors, I could see the fear and determination battling in her eyes, mirroring my own internal struggle. "Are you ready for this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, squaring her shoulders. "Let's do it." As we stepped into the lobby, the familiar scent of polished marble and expensive perfume washed over me. The security guard at the desk looked up, recognition dawning on his face. "Mr. Montero, we weren't expecting you today, sir." I forced a smile, hoping my unease wasn't visible. "Last-minute decision, Carlos. I'm showing my daughter around." If Carlos was surprised by my reference to Valeria as my daughter, he didn't show it. He simply nodded and waved us through. In the elevator, Valeria turned to me, her voice low. "Where do we start?" "Alejandro's office," I replied, punching in the code for the executive floor. "If there are any clues to his disappearance or his involvement with the Foundation's activities, they'll be there." The elevator doors slid open silently, revealing a corridor of closed doors and hushed conversations. As we made our way to Alejandro's office, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Alejandro's office was exactly as I remembered it, meticulously organized, with a view of the bay that could take your breath away. But now, knowing what we knew, every item seemed suspect. Every file could hold a clue, every drawer a hidden secret. "Start with the computer," I told Valeria, moving towards the filing cabinets. "Look for anything unusual. Encrypted files, hidden folders, anything." We worked in silence for what felt like hours, the tension in the room growing with each passing minute. I was elbow-deep in a drawer of financial reports when Valeria's sharp intake of breath made me turn. "Victor," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I think I found something." I moved to her side, peering over her shoulder at the computer screen. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was an email chain between Alejandro and Marcus Blackwood, discussing what appeared to be a series of offshore transactions. "This doesn't look good," Valeria murmured, scrolling through the messages. "It seems like Alejandro was trying to back out of something, but Blackwood wouldn't let him." I felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief that Alejandro hadn't willingly participated in whatever scheme Blackwood had concocted, but dread at the realization of just how deep this rabbit hole went. "We need to copy these," I said, reaching for a USB drive in my pocket. But before I could insert it, a new email notification popped up on the screen. The subject line read, "I know you're there, Victor." My hand froze mid-air. Valeria and I exchanged a look of panic. Slowly, dreading what I might see, I clicked on the email. The message was short, but its impact was devastating. "Did you really think you could sneak around unnoticed, Victor? I've been watching you since the moment you set foot in this building. If you want to see your son alive again, come to Warehouse 17 at the Old Port. Come alone, or Alejandro pays the price. You have 1 hour." It was signed simply, MB. "It's a trap," Valeria said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my mind racing. Of course it is. But what choice do we have? Valeria grabbed my arm, her eyes fierce. We have to call Michael. We can't go in there alone. I shook my head. You saw the message. If we involve anyone else, Alejandro could die. And if you go alone, you could die. Valeria's voice rose, fear and frustration evident in every word. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions raging inside me. Listen to me, Valeria. I need you to trust me. I have a plan, but I need your help. She looked at me for a long moment, conflict clear in her eyes. Finally, she nodded. What do you need me to do? Contact Michael. Tell him everything we've found and where I'm going. But make sure he knows not to make a move until I give the signal. And how will you do that? Valeria asked, her brow furrowed with concern. I pulled out my phone, showing her an app. This will send out an emergency signal with my exact location. If things go south, I'll activate it. Michael and his team can be there in minutes. Valeria didn't look convinced, but she nodded. Be careful, Victor. I can't lose another father. Her words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, all the complications, all the danger faded away, and I saw only the daughter I had just found. I pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling her stiffen for a moment before relaxing into it. I'll come back, I promised. And we'll bring Alejandro home. As I left the office, heading towards an uncertain fate, I couldn't help but reflect on the strange turns my life had taken. A few weeks ago, I thought I knew who I was, what my life was about. Now, everything had changed. The comfortable lie I had been living had been shattered, replaced by a dangerous truth. But as I stepped out into the San Francisco afternoon, the sun warm on my face, I felt a strange sense of purpose. Whatever happened next, whatever secrets were yet to be uncovered, I knew one thing for certain. I would do whatever it took to protect my family. The old port loomed ahead, a maze of abandoned warehouses and forgotten dreams. Somewhere in this labyrinth of rust and shadows, Marcus Blackwood was waiting, and with him the answers to questions I had only just begun to ask. As I approached Warehouse 17, my heart pounding in my chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into the heart of darkness itself, but I also knew that sometimes it's only in the darkest places that we truly find our light. With one last glance at the sun-drenched city behind me, I stepped into the shadows of Warehouse 17, ready to face whatever fate had in store. The interior of Warehouse 17 was a labyrinth of shadows and rusted machinery, the air thick with the scent of salt and decay. As I made my way deeper into the cavernous space, my footsteps echoed ominously, each sound a reminder of how alone I truly was. "Welcome, Victor," a voice called out from the darkness, smooth as silk and cold as ice. "I've been expecting you." I turned slowly, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. There, perched on a stack of old crates like a king on his throne, sat Marcus Blackwood. He was exactly as I remembered him from our brief encounters over the years, impeccably dressed, silver-haired, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Where's my son?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. Blackwood's smile widened, revealing teeth that gleamed in the dim light. "All in good time, old friend. First, I think we're due for a little chat, don't you?" I took a step forward, my fists clenching at my sides. "I'm not here to chat, Blackwood. I want Alejandro and I want answers." "Ah, but you see, Victor, the two are one and the same." Blackwood stood, his movement fluid and predatory. "Your son, your foundation, your entire life, it's all part of a much bigger picture. A picture you've been blind to for far too long." As he spoke, Blackwood began to circle me, his voice taking on a hypnotic quality. "Did you never wonder why your foundation was so successful? Why doors seemed to open for you wherever you went? It wasn't just your charm and business acumen, Victor, it was me. I've been pulling the strings from the very beginning." My mind reeled at his words. "What are you talking about?" Blackwood stopped in front of me, his eyes boring into mine. The Montero Foundation was the perfect front for my operations. Legitimate charity work mixed with, let's call them alternative revenue streams. Money laundering, insider trading, political favors, all hidden behind the veneer of your noble philanthropic efforts. I felt as though the ground was shifting beneath my feet. "No," I whispered. "That's impossible. I would have known." "Would you?" Blackwood's laugh was harsh in the echoing space. You were so focused on being the hero, on building your legacy, that you never stopped to look at the details. And when things didn't quite add up, you were all too happy to look the other way. The truth of his words hit me like a physical blow. How many times had I glossed over discrepancies in the Foundation's accounts? How often had I accepted vague explanations for suspicious transactions? "And Alejandro?" I asked, dreading the answer. Blackwood's expression softened slightly, an unexpected touch of sympathy in his eyes. "Ah, Alejandro. He figured it out, you know. Clever boy. He tried to stop it, tried to gather evidence against me. That's why I had to intervene." "Where is he?" I growled, taking a menacing step forward. Blackwood held up a hand, and suddenly the warehouse was flooded with light. I blinked, momentarily blinded, and when my vision cleared, I saw him. Alejandro was tied to a chair on a raised platform, a gag in his mouth and fear in his eyes. Next to him stood a man I recognized as one of Blackwood's bodyguards, a gun pressed to my son's temple. "One wrong move, Victor," Blackwood said softly, "and your son pays the price." I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Let him go, Blackwood. This is between you and me." Blackwood shook his head, tisking softly. "Oh, but it's not. You see, Alejandro here has become quite the problem. He knows too much, and he's proven himself to be unreliable. He's just a kid," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "Whatever he's done, whatever he knows, I'll take responsibility for it. Just let him go." For a moment, something like regret flashed across Blackwood's face. "I'm afraid it's not that simple, Victor. Your son has made some powerful enemies who won't be satisfied until he's taken care of." The implication of his words sent a chill down my spine. I glanced at Alejandro, saw the terror in his eyes, and made a decision. "Take me instead," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Let Alejandro go, and I'll do whatever you want. I'll take the fall for everything." Blackwood raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "How noble of you, Victor. But tell me, what makes you think your life is worth more than your son's?" "Because I built this," I said, spreading my arms wide. "The foundation, the connections, the reputation, it all comes from me. Without me, you lose your perfect front. Alejandro is just a loose end. I'm the one you need." For a long moment, Blackwood studied me, his eyes calculating. Then slowly, he nodded. "Perhaps you're right. Perhaps..." But before he could finish, the warehouse erupted into chaos. The sound of breaking glass filled the air as black-clad figures rappelled down from the ceiling. Smoke grenades exploded, filling the space with thick, choking fog. In the confusion, I lunged forward, tackling Blackwood to the ground. We grappled in the smoke, each fighting for control. I could hear shouts and gunfire around us, but my entire world had narrowed to this one fight. Suddenly, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Dad! Victor!" I looked up to see Valeria, her face streaked with dirt and determination, helping Alejandro off the platform. Relief flooded through me, momentarily weakening my grip on Blackwood. He seized the opportunity, his hand closing around something in his jacket. I saw the glint of metal and reacted instinctively, twisting to the side just as a shot rang out. Pain exploded in my shoulder, hot and sharp. I stumbled backward, my vision blurring. Through the haze of smoke and pain, I saw Blackwood rise, gun in hand, a look of cold triumph on his face. But before he could take aim again, another figure emerged from the chaos. Michael Chen, his face a mask of determination, tackled Blackwood from behind. The gun went flying, skittering across the concrete floor. As I watched, my strength ebbing, Michael and his team subdued Blackwood and his men. Valeria and Alejandro rushed to my side, their faces pale with concern. "Dad," Alejandro said, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." I reached out, gripping his hand tightly. "It's okay, son. It's over now." Valeria knelt beside me, pressing her hand to my wounded shoulder. "Hang on, Victor. Help is on the way." As the sound of sirens filled the air, I looked at the faces of my children, the son I had raised, and the daughter I was just beginning to know. Despite the pain, despite the shock of all that had been revealed, I felt a surge of love and protectiveness. "We're going to be okay," I murmured, not sure if I was reassuring them or myself. "We're going to get through this together." As darkness began to creep in at the edges of my vision, I held on to that thought. Whatever came next, whatever consequences we would face them as a family. The comfortable lie of my old life had been shattered, But in its place, a new truth was emerging, one built on honesty, courage, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The last thing I saw before consciousness slipped away was Valeria and Alejandro side by side, their hands clasped tightly together. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we had already won the most important battle of all. The steady beep of a heart monitor was the first sound I heard as consciousness slowly returned. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the harsh fluorescent lights of what I quickly realized was a hospital room. As the fog of sedation lifted, the memories came flooding back. The warehouse, Blackwood, the gunshot. "He's awake," a familiar voice said softly. I turned my head to see Valeria, her face etched with worry and fatigue, but her eyes bright with relief. On my other side, Alejandro leaned forward, grasping my hand. "Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're okay." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and scratchy. Valeria quickly offered me a cup of water, holding it to my lips as I sipped gratefully. "What happened?" I finally managed to croak out. "Blackwood is in custody," a new voice answered. I looked up to see Michael Chen entering the room, a satisfied smile on his face. Along with most of his organization, the evidence we gathered from the Foundation's records, combined with what we found at the warehouse, was more than enough to put them away for a very long time. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly followed by a wave of guilt and shame. "The Foundation," I began, but Alejandro cut me off. "It's not your fault, Dad," he said firmly. "Blackwood had been manipulating things for years. He had people at every level of the organization. There was no way you could have known." I shook my head, wincing at the pain the movement caused. I should have. I was so focused on the big picture, on being the hero, that I missed what was happening right under my nose. Valeria's hand found mine, her grip strong and reassuring. "What matters now is what we do next," she said. "The truth is out there. People know what happened. It's up to us to make it right." For a moment we all sat in silence, the weight of the past few weeks settling over us. Then slowly I began to laugh. It hurt my injured shoulder, but I couldn't stop. "Dad?" Alejandro asked, concern evident in his voice. "Are you okay?" I nodded, wiping tears from my eyes. "I'm sorry," I said, still chuckling. "It's just, a few weeks ago I thought I had it all figured out. I had the perfect life, the perfect family. And now you have a daughter you didn't know about, a son who got mixed up in a criminal conspiracy, and a charity foundation that's been exposed as a front for money laundering." Valeria finished for me, a wry smile on her face. "Exactly," I said, sobering. "Everything I thought I knew has been turned upside down. And yet," I looked at Valeria, then at Alejandro, feeling a surge of love and pride. "And yet, I've never felt more real, more alive." Alejandro squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have come to you when I first suspected something was wrong. I thought I could handle it on my own, prove myself." I shook my head. "No, son. I'm the one who should be sorry. I should have created an environment where you felt you could come to me with anything, where both of you could," I added, looking at Valeria. She met my gaze, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I think we all have some apologizing to do," she said softly, "and some forgiving." Michael cleared his throat, reminding us of his presence. "I hate to interrupt this family moment, but there are some things we need to discuss. The press is having a field day with this story, and the authorities will want to question all of you once Victor is well enough." I nodded, sitting up straighter despite the pain. "We'll face it together," I said, looking at my children. "No more secrets, no more lies. Whatever comes next, we'll handle it as a family." Over the next few weeks, as I recovered and we dealt with the fallout of Blackwood's arrest, that promise was put to the test. There were difficult conversations with the board of the Foundation, tense interviews with federal investigators, and a media storm that seemed to never end. But through it all, we stood together. Alejandro's knowledge of the Foundation's inner workings proved invaluable in identifying the extent of Blackwood's corruption and in beginning the process of making amends. Valeria's strength and fresh perspective helped us navigate the treacherous waters of public opinion and legal challenges. And me, I learned to listen, truly listen to my children, to see them not as extensions of myself or my legacy, but as individuals with their own strengths, fears, and dreams. 6 months after that fateful day in the warehouse, we stood together on the steps of the newly reorganized Montero Foundation. The crowd of reporters and onlookers fell silent as I stepped up to the microphone. "A wise person once said that the truth shall set you free," I began, my voice carrying across the plaza. "But what they don't tell you is that freedom can be terrifying. It means facing your mistakes, owning up to your faults, and doing the hard work of making things right." I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. The Montero Foundation was built on a lie that I, in my ignorance and pride, allowed to flourish. But today we start anew, with transparency, with integrity, and with a renewed commitment to truly serving our community. I gestured for Alejandro and Valeria to join me at the podium. My son and daughter will be joining the board of the new foundation, bringing their unique perspectives and unwavering commitment to doing what's right. Together, we will work to rebuild not just the foundation, but the trust that was broken. As we stood there, the three of us united in purpose, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in years. The comfortable lie of my old life was gone, shattered beyond repair. But in its place was something far more valuable, a truth that, while painful at times, had brought me closer to my family than I ever thought possible. Later that evening, as we sat together in the living room of our home, Valeria raised her glass in a toast. "To the truth," she said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "May it continue to challenge us, change us, and bring us closer together." Alejandro and I raised our glasses as well. "To the truth," we echoed. As we clinked our glasses together, I looked at my children, the son I had always known and the daughter I was still getting to know, and felt a surge of gratitude. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But we would face them together, bound not by the comfortable lies of the past, but by the sometimes uncomfortable, always powerful truth of who we really were. And in that truth I realized we had found something far more precious than any fortune or reputation. We had found each other. We had found family. As the sun set over San Francisco, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, I silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought us to this moment. The comfortable lie was gone, but in its place, we had found a truth worth living for, and that I knew was the greatest gift of all.